Hello, welcome to the Stream's online pre-show. I'm Femi OK. Today we're talking about violence against Canada's Indigenous women. Now, over the years, multiple reports have highlighted the severity of the problem, including another one just last week. But what will turn report findings and recommendations into genuine solutions? We have just the guest line up to address that, but also my co-host Malika Bilal is searching to see what the online community is saying, and they are saying
they have a lot to address, and questions, some answers, some solutions. We'll get to all of those in a minute, but we want you to chime in. Send us your questions, your comments, your thoughts using hashtag AJStream.
So to help us discuss this, you on our online community and you watching on TV, but also we're joined by Megan Rhodes. She's a researcher with Human Rights Watch, currently focusing on violence against women. Carolyn Bennett is a Canadian Member of Parliament with the Liberal Party. She's Vice Chair of the Special Committee on Violence Against Indigenous Women. Michelle Taina Oded is a President of the Native Women's Association of Canada. And Holly Jarrett is a Native women's rights activist. It's great to have you all here, ladies, in the stream. Hello, everybody.
Hello.
Hello. So, who knows who
Great to be here.
Oh, very good. It's great to have you here. Who knows who? Megan, who do you know already?
I know Michelle Oded and Carolyn Bennett, the Minister of Parliament.
Well, tell us one line about Michelle. What should we know about Michelle?
Oh, she is an amazingly brave and eloquent advocate.
Wow, Michelle. Tell us what you know about Megan in a line.
Well, Megan was able to help many women up northern of British Columbia, and because of her work, we have a better relationship with the RCMP, or they have no choice.
It's not always when we have a politician on the show that they enhance the show, but in this case, Carolyn definitely is going to. She's pretty critical to this conversation. Carolyn, Megan says she knows you. What do you know about Megan?
Well, we just, as politicians, we need facts, and we need people who can really dig down and find out what's really going on. And her report on the Highway of Tears, I think, really opened some eyes around Parliament. In fact, that her report may have precipitated the government agreeing to have our special committee. So we're very grateful to Megan.
All right. And I actually have to say that, Carolyn, just before we got started, like, Carolyn, you really should start with Holly. Holly is incredibly important. Holly, why are you particularly important in this conversation?
I think because I'm Loretta's cousin, and because of the petition that I started that has received amazing reviews and a ton of signatures in about a week.
Okay, so anybody who's outside of Canada will wonder who Loretta's cousin is and who Loretta is. So we will dig a little bit deeper on that. But it's a great reminder to remind everybody, even though you're all very tuned in to the conversation as our guests, to do explain who people are and why they're relevant and why they're important players, so everybody can have a very accessible conversation. Holly, I'm looking forward to you sharing your story. I've got some pictures of you campaigning, so we'll show those in just a moment. And we will get started on a conversation that's been going on for decades in Canada, and where do we go with it now? And the latest recommendation and reports, how do we change these reports into something that actually changes women's lives in Canada? That is a big conversation. We have 40 minutes to do it in, and we will start that in 30 seconds time. Don't go away. The main show of the stream starts in 30 seconds. Hi, I'm Femi OK, and you're in the stream. Today, Canada's Indigenous women are 3 times more likely to experience violence than the rest of the population. And there are plenty of reports about how serious this problem is. But what will it take to turn statistics into solutions? So our digital producer Malika Bilal is always online. Even when she's asleep, she's online. She buffers, she schedules,
tweeting,
she's always there.
It's true, but for a good reason.
Yeah.
And today's a very good reason because, you know, the call for looking into justice for murdered and missing Indigenous women has been going on for a while.
Sure.
But just today, a few hours ago actually, I saw these tweets. This is a protest that was going on in Toronto where activists were blocking rail lines, others were blocking roads. These are pictures from Walking Wolf, and she tweets this: "We can handle the snow. What we can't handle is apathy. Many nations, one message, no more violence." You can see them out in the snow there. They're using the hashtag MMIW. We want you to use the hashtag AJStream to let us know what you think.
So being in this conversation for this next 20-30 minutes, we have Megan Rose. Megan Rose is a Human Rights Watch researcher, and Megan right now is currently focusing on violence against women. Megan, it's great to have you here as part of the conversation.
Thank you so much for having me.
We look forward to hearing from you in just a moment.
Hello, this is Stephen Edsity, Executive Director for the Navajo Nation Environmental Protection Agency, and I am in the stream.
In Canada, Indigenous women make up 3% of the country's female population, but 10% of all female homicides. That's according to the Native Women's Association of Canada. They're also 5 times more likely to die from violence than non-natives. Under mounting public pressure to bring justice to Canada's missing and murdered Indigenous women, a special committee was set up last year to investigate the causes of this violence and to seek possible solutions. The group submitted its report last week, which included 16 recommendations on how the government could better deal with this issue. But activists and victims' families say that a whole series of studies have failed to lead to genuine solutions. So what will it take to protect Canada's First Nations women? To help us talk about this, we're joined by Carolyn Bennett. She's a Canadian Member of Parliament with the Liberal Party. She's also Vice Chair of the Special Committee on Violence Against Indigenous Women. Michelle Taina Audet is President of the Native Women's Association of Canada. And Holly Jarrett is a Native women's rights activist. It's great to have you all here in the stream. I want to start out with Michelle, because when you hear these statistics, when you hear how Native women in Canada have these lives which are making them vulnerable, where they're suffering from violence, what is going on and why has it gone on for so long? How would you explain it to us outside of Canada?
I would say many reasons, such as ignorance, or I would say colonialism. It's been there since the day one of the imposition of the Indian Act, and also today when we look at the reality of Aboriginal women in Canada, it's sad to see we're the poorest of the poorest and more vulnerable. And since 2003, with the research that Amnesty International did with the title of Stolen Sisters, it was already flagged to the Harper government, which is the government right now. And we're in 2014, and it seemed like we're just repeating ourselves. And today we have more and more, and it's sad to say, women on the database of missing and murdered, we can say 1 up to 7 women are disappearing or killed every month in Canada.
Right. So Michelle, the first thing you said was colonialism. How do you equate colonialism with 600 missing people over a number of years?
Well, let's say racism. Megan Road will be able to explain exactly what happened in the human rights reports between the relationship with the RCMP. RCMP for us, it's the Royal, the police force for Canada. So there's a lot of racism, discrimination, and also power towards our own Aboriginal women. And also the policies, the program, the services. Just a quick example, we have 633 community across Canada, and we only have 41 shelter for women in order to protect them if there's a family violence.
What stories did you find out, Megan, when you went to Canada doing your research?
Right. Well, we spent about 5 weeks in northern British Columbia, traveling from small community to small community and speaking with Indigenous women and girls. And what we heard was very disturbing. On the one hand, we were hearing that police failed to respond adequately when women and girls went missing, or when there was domestic violence or sexual assault. On the other hand, we also heard about outright police abuse of Indigenous women and girls. So everything from officers putting on handcuffs so tight that it scraped the skin, to inappropriate searches of Indigenous women and girls in custody by male officers, excessive use of force, all the way up to physical and sexual assault. And all of this comes on top of, as Michelle was saying, the colonial history, including the residential school system in which thousands and thousands of Indigenous children were taken from their homes, and it was the Mounties who were charged with being truant officers in that system.
You know, we're hearing echoes of that online, the challenges facing Indigenous women in Canada. Jazeera on Twitter says, one of the challenges is access to social and good quality health services off the reserves, recognition by government and law enforcement when women go missing. Another person, Hayden, writes in, Indigenous women aren't respected. He follows up saying this leads to violence in the first place, and then the aloof institutional response. So Holly, you're a Native women's rights activist, you're an Indigenous woman yourself. Are these some of the challenges that resonate with you?
Absolutely, daily. I'm listening to everything and thinking, you know, how would anybody look at this from the outside? So what I think is our government is completely aloof about this. They know that they've done something wrong and that they've allowed all of the mistakes that have been made in the past to carry through and carry forward. So I really don't know if Harper's government is even willing to listen or to fess up to the mistakes that they've already made. But being an Aboriginal woman means that doors are shut in our face. It means that we're not taken seriously.
Can you give
we are a marginalized
Holly,
population.
you said this happens to you daily, so can you give us an idea of the doors that are shutting in your face? Give us a little slice of your life.
A slice of my life?
Yeah.
Right now, I had a driver come and pick me up so that I could get to the studio, so that I could make it here, but I don't have enough food to last me until after Friday. I have a diploma in community studies with adult and youth corrections, but I can't get a job in my field. There are a million different things. I mean, it's just such a part of my life that it's very hard to point out exactly how I'm marginalized. But if you look at my life compared to a couple of my white friends who've had the same kind of upbringing, who've gone to university, college, and who've had jobs and families, you can definitely see there's some kind of a difference, but you can't quite put your finger on it. And that comes from the impact that colonialism has had on our generations. My mother is a survivor of residential school abuse and residential school system. However, our government won't even acknowledge their part in her attending residential school. So along with the inquiry and the apologies that everybody else got, even my mother in our community hasn't got that satisfaction yet. And that's all a big fight for us to, it's intergenerational. So my mother fought, now I fight. And I don't think that I think that the way that things are going, that we're just going to have to continue to fight from this side and on up the line. And we're very lucky to have people like Carolyn Bennett, and very, very lucky to have people like Michelle Audette and Cheryl Maloney and Miss Rhodes with us on our fight. And I think that right now is a pivotal moment for us to move forward.
Caroline, is this a political solution to this issue? Because it's been going on for decades. I hear Stephen Harper's Conservative government being called out so far in this conversation, but this was a problem long before his administration was even in power. Caroline?
Yes, it was a problem long before this. But he has had the power within his cabinet to accept some change and accept some motion forward. I mean, he's been the UN Commissioner Ananya. I mean, it's come from the UN of apparently we have some big issues. 824 murdered women is enough, but 824 murdered women that make up 25% of the population of all of the women murdered in Canada, that's a pretty big sign, and Harper doesn't seem to want to move. He's more focused on what happens after our women are murdered.
Right. Let me bring in our MP here, Caroline. What I wanted to know was there a political solution to this issue? You're certainly involved in it. Was there a political solution that you feel is important?
Well, I think when you listen to the families, they have called together with all the premiers and the Native Women's Association and even the Victims Ombudsman for Canada that we have to have a national public inquiry, and that would expose some of the things that Megan referred to. But what's the issue right now is it has been going on for a very long time. That it was the Native Women's Association that came forward a number of years ago with Amnesty International to point out really the numbers. They proved the instinct that their women and girls were going missing and found murdered in way too great numbers. When this government canceled the funding for that work to continue, then there began the cry for a national public inquiry, and that's what the political will has to be, to get to the national public inquiry that'll actually tell us what's going on. If all Canadians or all your viewers could hear some of the stories of the families, of like Megan documented, but that two girls are missing and they're just deemed to be runaways, but their cell phones and their purses are left on the table. And then the stepfather of one of the girls says, you know, if I wasn't questioned, who was questioned, I should have been the prime suspect, a stepfather of a teenage girl. And that's what the families are saying. There just doesn't seem to be any real solid follow-up when one of these young women or girls
Carolyn,
is missing. And long before they're dead.
Can I just say that?
Go ahead, Holly.
Can I just say that the way that our family found out that Loretta actually had passed.
Okay,
and
so Holly, let me just help
sisters.
out. So, Holly, I apologize for interrupting you because you're about to tell us how closely you are associated to this issue because you have a cousin called Loretta Sanders, and tell us what happened to Loretta.
Mm-hmm. So on February 13th, Loretta went to her apartment to get rent from two people who she had subletted her apartment to, and she never returned. So I didn't know about this until the following Monday, on the 17th, when our cousin called me and said, Loretta's missing in Halifax. So I kind of took a deep breath and thought, maybe she just doesn't feel like calling home, because I know that Loretta called home every day. Maybe that's the case, and let's give her some space. But it just escalated from there. We found out about the car that had been stolen and brought to Windsor. So 3 provinces away, it had been stolen and brought there. It was found there with 2 suspects. But our family still really didn't have that information first. None of that information was given to our families until we heard it through the media. So there is a perfect example of, you know, the kind of systemic issues that we're dealing with. I think that had this been, let's say this was McKay. This was McKay's family who'd gone missing. I don't think that his family would have had to find out that he was murdered on the news. When they found her body in a bag, in a hockey bag in the median of a very, very busy highway.
Right. And let me just add
again, that's how we found out. We all found out on the news.
All right, so Peter McKay is the Minister of Justice in Canada. Holly, thank you for sharing that with us.
Right.
I know it's really important, and it's a horrible story for you and your family.
Definitely. It's also one of the reasons that we noticed this story trending last week, because her name was trending. We actually gathered all of the social media reaction. I pulled it up on my screen here. There was an outpouring of support. There were vigils and people sharing pictures after that happened. So Megan, this leads us to this question from Taylor, who actually just tweeted us after listening to these stories. She says the most important question is why? Why so much violence against Indigenous women? Who wants to silence them? And maybe not so specifically in the case of Loretta, because police are still working the details of that out, but in general, why?
Well, I mean, I think that's a very good question, and actually, probably in terms of talking about the systemic roots, Michelle would be much better placed. But the question we've been asking is, you know, Canada has an international legal obligation to exercise due diligence in preventing, investigating, prosecuting, and punishing the people responsible for this violence. And even after many UN reports, that still is not happening. The due diligence obligation is not being met. So that's the question we're asking. But to your original question, I think perhaps Michelle might be able to shed more light on that.
Michelle.
Well, the way we see it at the Native Women Association of Canada, there's many aspects. Of course, at the political level, there's a lack or a lack of willingness, or just they don't want to deal with that. At the same time, can you imagine, as a government who wish to deal on a specific land claim with a community or a town in a province, and we know that First Nation people are not an asset for us as white government, I would say, this government. So I had the feeling that more we keep the Aboriginal poor, vulnerable, depending on us, and as a child, because since 1869, the Indian Act in Canada will consider myself and the rest of us under the Indian Act as minors, as children. I'm only 17, even if I'm 42 years old and a mother of 5 children. So there's that attitude in Canada where they will put us aside and will decide for us. So when I mention the discrimination, it's also the racism. When we tell Canada their policy, their program, or their services are not at all culturally adequate for us, adapted for us, so we always, at the end of the day, reacting about them. And just so it was mentioned about the systemic issue, we're not even there. We're not even consulted to design the next policy or the next legislation. And right now, the strategy of this government is saying that they do so much for us, so much. How come suddenly, when a woman will kill herself after being bullied through Facebook in Nova Scotia, a teenager, the Prime Minister of Canada paid a visit to the Parson family and said how he regretted that gesture, which I agree. We don't need to kill ourselves because of that kind of violence.
Right. Michelle, let me just share something with you, because we asked the Minister of the Status of Women, Kelly Leach, we asked her for a statement for this program, and her department sent us a statement that they'd already issued. I'm sure you've seen this statement already, but let me share it with our audience. And so the Minister of Status of Women said that ending violence against all women and girls remains a priority for our government. As a government, we remain concerned about the high number of missing and murdered Aboriginal women in Canada and the devastating impact these tragedies have on families and communities across our country. And so they're looking at this latest report and they're reviewing it. They said they get back in a timely manner. They've also said they've committed 25 million Canadian dollars to actually helping with this issue. How do you respond to that?
Respond with anger, if I may, with anger, because it's giving false information. First of all, the 25 million that they say they're giving for missing and murdered Aboriginal women, it's for a national center where we have a database for missing person, Canadian men, Canadian women, immigrant, Aboriginal, name it, we're all there. So it's not only Aboriginal women. We had to fight, the Native Women of Canada had to fight to make sure that we have that component of the cultural identity. The other thing also, they say they will provide services for family who lost a loved one. Thousands of our family members, not only 800 missing and murdered, we have thousands and thousands of that they're not yet part of the database. Sad. Where do they go? They don't even know. Right. So it's a Canadian service. So just to conclude on that, also saying that they're providing money for the DNA and they will do great stuff for Aboriginal women. It's only after the federal election in 2016. So for me, when I read the statement of the Minister of Status of Women, since day one that I was elected, I extended my heart and my hand to them, and I said, instead arguing through media, why don't we sit down?
Okay, Michelle, take a breath for a moment, because I just want to get some community. We love listening to you. I wasn't being rude. I love listening to you, but I've just got a few more minutes left. It's like, don't get Michelle started.
Well, I love her passion, and I'm seeing it online. And what we would be remiss if we didn't do, our community is saying, is to talk about solutions.
Sure.
So on the one hand, you have people online saying this is up to the Native community to deal with. Hayden says it's up to the Native community to deal with. I just stole his words. He says you should read a series of tweets with the hashtag #ItEndsHere. That was started on this website here, nationsrising.org, and it's basically a hashtag. There's several tweets on this today. Check it out, with people saying their own solutions for within the community for how it can end. But Carolyn, I want to give you something on the other side. Listen to this video comment for someone who's talking more about solutions from outside the community.
Missing and murdered Indigenous women is Canada's dirty little secret. It's time to open Pandora's box, demand a national inquiry, examine the causes, implement whatever solutions are needed, and save our sisters.
So she mentions those words, national inquiry, which we heard earlier during this show. Is that the solution?
Well, I think, as we were saying, this is what everybody knows has to happen if we're going to get down into the racism and sexism in policing, if we're going to actually have concrete, the ability to have a real plan going forward. So if you think about what others have said around colonization, around residential schools, that one of the root causes has been the lack of a secure personal cultural identity that Michelle talked about. That if people don't feel good about themselves, then poverty, violence, all of those things really feed into a lack of resilience, lack of control over their lives. And so that vulnerability that has existed in Canada for Indigenous women and girls has got to be addressed, and this is something that has a long-term requires a long-term plan, and it's complex. That means that the issues cross all the different government departments, all the different jurisdictions, and that's why you have to have the inquiry first, and then come together with a plan.
All right.
One of the things that we found in the not so good inquiry in British Columbia was that there was evidence of a serial killer in British Columbia in the Picton inquiry, but because the victims were Indigenous, the younger RCMP women officers were not listened to. There was a clear pattern that was ignored because that they were thought that they were prostitutes or drug addicts or alcoholics. The reason Loretta Saunders' case is so important is because it breaks through those stereotypes and means that we've all got to act.
Let me just give the last word, literally the last word, to Holly. Do you think that would make any difference if Canada had gone through this process already that Caroline was suggesting, that your cousin would be alive and with us today?
Absolutely.
Right. Wow.
I really do. I really do think so.
Okay.
If we had she was poor. Loretta died because she was poor. She had to go and get money from people. She didn't have a lot of things to build on at, like, you know, from standing from a single point of view. She didn't have a lot of support.
Right.
If she had had the proper police protection in place before she had to go and confront these people herself, maybe we wouldn't be here.
All right, so that is Holly Jarrett talking about her cousin Loretta Saunders. You can see her back here on a change.org petition. We will tweet that out so you can find out more about that after the show. Meanwhile, let me tell you about what we're doing on the next AJ stream. An Al Jazeera investigation has uncovered new suspects in the bombing of Pan Am Flight 103 over Lockerbie, Scotland. But not everybody is buying it. Those who agree and disagree will join the conversation. Until then, we'll see you online. Thanks for watching. Do you know, there's something that's been bugging me with this conversation. Welcome back. This is the Streams Online Post Show. I'm already back into the conversation. Today we're talking about violence against Indigenous Canadian women. Our guests are Megan Rhodes, she's from Human Rights Watch. Caroline Burnett is a Canadian Member of Parliament. Michelle Taina Audette is from the Native Women's Association of Canada. And Holly Jarrett is a Native women's rights activist. So, ladies, it's great to have you back in the conversation. The thing that was bugging me was that I'm hearing an awful lot about we need a national inquiry in Canada. That will help solve this situation. And I didn't understand why a national inquiry would make any difference to what was actually happening down on the ground. How would that stop more young women, more indigenous women for meeting a violent end? Isn't that just a posh name for another report? Michelle?
No. This report for me it's a slap in the face for the family. But if we had the opportunity, like this government had the opportunity to be different this time, and with this national public inquiry, we would have been able to have something totally independent, something non-partisan and legal also, where all the expertise will be together to making sure that we are providing the best protection, the best security for our women. And at the same time, we would design with this, we will have a blueprint coming from that inquiry, a national plan of action for ending violence, where all province, territories, municipalities, First Nation, Métis, and Inuit government would work together to implement that plan of action.
So right now we've got 16 recommendations, and Carolyn, you were Vice Chair of the Special Committee on Violence Against Indigenous Women. How much were you involved in this report?
Well, I think that the viewers need to understand that those 16 recommendations had nothing to do with what we heard, that the Conservative members used their majority on the committee to walk on a set of recommendations that actually are about the status quo. To continue doing this, continue, maintain, explore options. This was not what we heard. And that report doesn't reflect the recommendations that came from those with expertise, nor those with lived experience. And so for the minister to say she's going to respond to this report, which is a report that practically says everything they're doing is perfect and carry on with the status quo, is the reason why you hear that frustration from Michelle and Holly and Megan and anybody involved with this.
So Carolyn, are you telling me that your report was
hijacked? We wasted a year.
Was it hijacked? Are you telling me that?
Totally.
How is that possible?
Hijacked.
How did that happen?
Because what happens is the Library of Parliament brings together a summary of what that we heard, and then the government uses its majority to put in 16 recommendations instead of the ones that were presented.
Let me give our audience a taste of what some of these recommendations are. I don't recommend that you look at my laptop because it's not exciting to look at. It's just black and white. But here's one of them. The federal government continue to strengthen the criminal justice system to ensure, among other things, that violent and repeat offenders serve appropriate sentences. Well, which government doesn't do that? Here's another one. The federal government continue to support programming and legislation that allow Aboriginal communities to respond to violence. There were a lot of recommendations that sound almost like, well, this is what you would be doing normally, but we kind of need in this situation something that's out of the ordinary to address what's really happening. Like Holly, for instance, what happened to your cousin. What would you like to see change? Because we didn't get enough to what should we do now? Holly.
Sorry, was that question directed towards me?
Yeah, it was, Holly.
Oh, what I would like to see happen now is for the government comprehensively to put together one inquiry where we can speak with all of the families of all of the missing and murdered Aboriginal women. However we need to do that, where we can look into the reasons that we are where we are now and why our women are the most at risk for murder and to go missing right now. And then we can move forward. After that, then we can move forward. But ultimately, our very first step has to be an inquiry as to how we're going to do it.
I just feel this is going to put everything back by a couple of years, but maybe I'm just being a cynic here. Malika, what's the
there's also cynicism online, but before I get to that, I wanted to share something that was shared with us. Lauren Chief Elk tweeted us this. She says you should definitely visit this website, and she links us to a map, and this is a crowdsourced map of reports of missing that were unresolved, missing and solved, and unsolved murders of Indigenous women in Canada. You can see the map, and you can click on each one and get more information about those cases. But this is all the basis for something that Steve says Canada's not interested in resolving. He says Canada's not interested in protecting Indigenous women. We need a new government, preferably a kinder people interest. But I want to direct this to you, Michelle, because is it necessarily with this change under a new government? I mean, this has been happening for years. It's not just particularly under the current administration. So is a new government going to bring in the inquiry that people are asking for, and will then that bring solutions?
You see me happy? Yes, with a new government, because I spoke with the Minister of Aboriginal Affairs. I said, you have the chance now before the next federal election, and they stay with the no answer. So we've been promoting civic participation across Canada. A lot of women are thinking jumping on the boat for the next federal election, and as myself also, I'm considering maybe paddling with some people who will believe that Indigenous women need to be on top of the priority for the next government.
Let me just include the
Excellent.
Minister of Justice's comment, and it sounds like he was ready to take action. Have a listen to this.
Violence against children. Look, the Loretta Saunders case is heartbreaking, given that this was her life's work. This very subject of missing and murdered Aboriginal women was what she had devoted her studies to. And the truth is, we need action, not further studies, not further examinations of the problems. We know what the problems are. We need actions. And that involves more than just legislative response. It involves programming. It involves working with all levels of government and the private sector to get at some of these very real issues in our country, including the fact that child sexual assaults are rising. This is one area of the law that I find really alarming. So you can expect that there will be more legislation coming forward, certainly from the Department of Justice.
So that's Justice Minister Peter MacKay there talking about to take action. But Megan, you were out with communities, you went through a lot of communities when you were doing your research. Were they coming up with their own solutions? Were they coming up with their own strategies to make sure that their women and that their female community was staying safe?
Well, yes, of course. I mean, in the absence of the federal government taking responsibility or the provincial governments taking responsibility, communities are doing whatever they can to provide protection. A number of Indigenous communities in northern BC have erected their own billboards to warn about the dangers of hitchhiking. The communities all came together in 2006 to do a symposium on the Highway of Tears. Those recommendations are still not implemented. In terms of the responsibilities of the provincial government, for example, to establish a shuttle bus along the highway to
Tell us about this
hitchhiking.
Highway of Tears.
Yes, this is a particular stretch of Highway 16, Yellowhead Highway in northern British Columbia, where a number of women and girls have gone missing. A disproportionate number have been Indigenous. Right. And many of these cases have gone unsolved. Right. But the one thing I did want to point out about the billboards, and they are so important, but we have to move beyond awareness. What does it mean to someone who can't afford to have private transportation to get to a doctor's appointment that there's a sign up? That does not get her a way to get to the doctor. So that is why so many people were looking with hope towards this committee, that there would be an effort to outline a real plan of action along with the National Commission of Inquiry, and why it is so angering and disappointing that they did not get that far.
All right, so this has been going on for a very long time. It's not over yet, not even with this latest report. Malika, last word from the community.
Well, one more response from community activists themselves. This is actually was shared on Carolyn's website. This is half of a moccasin, and on it you see it says, "Hello, my name is," and in the line where you write your name it says, "Who cares?" This is part of a project called Walking with Our Sisters, and that project is by a woman named Christy Belcourt. She launched this collaborative project to bring awareness to Indigenous women. It's just one of the many things that are happening.
So to Holly, to Michelle, to Carolyn and to Megan, thank you for giving us some insight into what's going on with Canada's Indigenous women. This conversation is not over yet. We're taking it online at #AJStream. Let me tell you about our next program. An Al Jazeera investigation has uncovered new suspects in the bombing of Pan Am Flight 103 over Lockerbie, Scotland. But not everybody is buying it, and those who agree and disagree will join our conversation. That's the next AJ Stream. Until then, see you online.